Last week, we aired part one of our first ever Say Easy, Do Hard segment on minimum viable security. In part two, Jon Fredrickson, former Chief Risk Officer at Blue Cross Blue Shield of Rhode Island, joined us to debate the hard part, the actual areas to focus on. The final list might surprise you. Grab some bubbles and kick off 2025 with part two of this great segment.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network.
From the Security Weekly Vault, it's the show where we explore the business of security to improve the security of business. Your trusted source for actionable insights on leadership, communication, and innovation. Get ready for Business Security Weekly.
All right, gentlemen, so we just spent almost exactly half an hour going through the top 6 minimum viable security areas to focus on. So let me recap just quickly for the audience. So at number 1, we said asset management. We have to understand what assets we have. Systems, applications, software, identities, vendors. We're going to throw it all into that bucket. Next, Jon said, go patch management. I'm going to prioritize patch management over vul management and patching those systems. Because if I have a good asset inventory, I know based on the different versions of those assets where I should be applying patches. Third on that list is identity access and management with MFA, SSO, PIM-PAM kind of all rolled in there. Let's tackle the identity problem.
Still my favorite.
It's still your favorite. Yes. We'll get there in a short minute. Next, number 4 was EDR, MDR, and XDR. Focus on the endpoint, leverage the endpoint data, figure out how to detect and respond, and use those platforms effectively. Number 5, backup recovery. We need to have effective backup and recovery strategies to prepare the organizations from a resiliency standpoint. Number 6 on that list is risk management. Okay, so that's where we landed. So now what I want to get into is, where are some of these vendors at? All right, I want to get into the vendor discussion a little bit and debate some of the different vendors and look at the different vendors and really understand, like, who are the people we should be thinking about for some of these solutions. So let's start with asset management, because Tyler, you brought up a question in the last segment saying, well, does anybody do this? So when I think about this at the top of my mind, I'm going to list like maybe a handful of vendors. Jupiter One, Axonius, Qualys has been doing a lot around asset management. Those are some of the initial ones that come to mind. Who else?
So ServiceNow.
ServiceNow.
I'll tell you, one of the most powerful platforms on an asset management and CMDB perspective is ServiceNow. But the thing with that is you need to be all in on all the other aspects as well. The ITSM side, right?
Oh, for sure, yeah.
You have to have
it's a great place to put the information.
It is.
Like you said, it's not going to detect a new API dropping in the cloud, right?
No, unless you do some integrations, discovery integrations and things of that nature. But it can be done. But a central platform that can kind of manage your world of supporting the assets, getting that overall management of the assets, getting the posture of the assets, tying it to things like projects and incidents and help desk and all of that. It's a great tool.
Yeah, Remedy's up there too. If you've got 400 people to
manage it.
Yeah.
But I mean, look, ServiceNow has done some really interesting moves over the years, right? I think they have. Started as an ITSM platform. They brought over some of the old Archer guys. They started to build out some ERM, GRC capabilities and some other capabilities.
Module.
SecOps modules. They've done some really interesting stuff. Jon, I'm curious, like, what are you using for asset management? If you can tell us. Okay.
Yeah, for sure. And we just integrated Qualys with ServiceNow with the vulnerability management. It's paying off big time. But like you said, it's still a little bit of, you only know what you know.
Sure.
Right. It's like, sure, these are all my assets. I'm going to put them in ServiceNow. There's a discovery agent. It's, it's only as effective as configured, but you still need to be really diligent in making sure that everything is in there.
It's the do hard. It's the do hard part.
Yeah.
Having a great asset management suite is awesome, but if it's just a system that you haven't adopted, it's no good.
Right. So what I heard, which was really interesting, is ServiceNow with an integration with Qualys and some of the things that Qualys has been doing, because Qualys has been talking about cybersecurity asset management along with Axonius and Jupiter One. But it sounds like a combination of what ServiceNow gives you with what Qualys gives you is fulfilling an asset management need.
Yeah. And it's important, there's some budget differences between the two platforms, right? So
Yeah.
for me to extend my Qualys license, I'd have to pay for it, but IT pays for ServiceNow, so I'm fine with it.
Aha, got it. We'll have to talk to Sumedh about making that a little more easier to get through.
But there's upfront benefits of it too, because like I said, it integrates to your project management suite. So brand new project implementing 1,000 assets, right? Guess what? Those assets are tied to the project, right? You're implementing, and the second they go live, they go active in your asset management system. If a help desk person goes in and gets a ticket and they start looking at it and say, wait a minute, this is an asset that's not in my asset management database. Now they go look at it and say, why is it not in my CMDB or my asset management database? Let me investigate. Oh, it's legit? All right, cool, let's add it. So it gives you that proactive stance as well.
Right.
So are some of the vulnerability management suites that do kind of both of this? Think of like Rapid7 or Rumble, which is now what, Run Zero, whatever HD Moore's rebranded Rumble to. Does some of the vulnerability management that is also doing asset tracking, do those provide benefits where if you're at a zero budget, can you evaluate and look at something that is doing both of those as a viable?
I think it's a piece of the
cost?
puzzle, but I don't think it's all of it. Because here's the thing that like a ServiceNow asset management database can do. You can have parent-child assets now.
Okay.
So I have a chassis with 6 hosts. Now I can create relationships, right? I don't know if you can do that within that system.
Yeah. Our vulnerability management tool will tell our CMDB when it's detected something that you don't have.
Yeah.
Which I think is important, because I could, we joked around, scanning CIDR blocks, but why not, right?
Right. Why not?
So just scan everything. If something popped up, if ServiceNow doesn't know about it,
That's right.
I'm going
You
to
build
tell
a workflow.
ServiceNow, and then it's going to tell IT to build that out.
You build a workflow and say, hey, I found this asset that, that we don't know about.
Yeah.
Somebody go do some discovery. Go figure out what it is.
Well, we start to think about the dynamic landscape that is now IT. You start to think about, so you got the hypervisor, you've got the BMC or IPMI baseband side of that. That's at the bare metal.
Yep.
But then you take that a layer deeper. You've got VMware assets. Then you got virtual assets. On top of that, then you
That's
have
right.
Docker assets
Yep.
that may have containers that have IP addresses that may be an entirely different subset.
And you can build out all those relationships.
And
in
then the
ServiceNow.
APIs.
and then
and
the
then the
API. And then
APIs.
the API. Oh my gosh.
But that's the hard work, though, is mapping it all out, right?
Yeah.
But within ServiceNow, you can do those mappings, and now you can find out what business line is going to be affected by something.
Then
going
you can
down.
establish least privilege and identity to tie to those assets and those correlations and relationships. I think without that full picture, there is no way to properly do, from an attacker standpoint. Like I love this shit because this is exactly how I map out an attack. I think of the places that people are not going far enough, the API level, right? Like, or even the VMware. So base level, I can hit the BMC, or I can hit the BMC to hit a virtual environment that then allows me to get to an API.
Yep.
Those mappings, most IT departments are very segmented, and they're not correlating or talking between the different groups that manage those. So that provides an opportunity from an attacker standpoint to leverage and abuse that.
Yeah. The other piece that's really cool within ServiceNow too is I've done it in the past, is you can take the NVD RSS feed it into your asset management database, and then you can get alerts. So we would say for a 10 out of 10, alert the knock, and they're going to respond right away. For a 9 out of 10, alert the knock, right? So we could build in that workflow.
See, that scares attackers. That makes me frustrated.
But I like that. That's what I want to do. I want to scare you,
Absolutely.
Tyler.
Frustrates you all day long.
But it's the beauty of what you can do. You can start pulling in like those RSS feeds, and now you can real-time workflows. You can start building out.
That's actually more scary than an EDR or XDR. Like I can bypass an EDR, I can bypass an XDR, I can.
That's why it's number
Get
one
around
and number two.
Yeah. You want to know what the knock's going to do?
I think that's
They're going to get
important.
that NVD alert. They're going to look at the asset, and they're going to say, is there a workaround or is there a patch? They're going to patch it if there's a patch, and they're going to implement the workaround if there's a workaround.
Right.
And then they'll patch it later because now it's in a queue.
Right.
It goes into that problem management queue, which you can manage in ServiceNow, that says when a patch becomes available, guess what? Change management cycle.
It's very proactive too. It takes the stance from a physical standpoint. Like, all right, I can't get a fish in. I need to go on site, dump a physical box on the network. At that point, you have an asset inventory. If something new pops on the network,
Discovery's going to
You
find
don't even need an 802.11x. Like, you are identifying it based on the fact that you know what you have, and now something new is there.
I'd always prefer you not get an IP address. That's a little. If I detect you with a vulnerability scan, then that's too late as far as I'm concerned.
Now, it's interesting, John, because we didn't prioritize vuln management, but you are leveraging vuln management capabilities to enhance your asset management.
Well, I'm allowed to buy 7 things at Blue Cross.
Oh, okay. I mean, fair enough, right? I'm like, you got the budget, baby. You go for it.
It's not 5 or 6.
Is it the asset management component of Qualys, or is it the ability to scan and also associate vulnerability data with those assets as part of that tie into ServiceNow?
It's pure vulnerability into ServiceNow. Yep.
So ServiceNow, asset management, and CMDB is that center of the universe.
Yes.
And then everything ties to that, right?
Yep.
So I'm curious why some of the other vuln management players have not created more of that.
Tenable does.
Asset. So they all tie
Tenable
into
ties
it.
into
Yeah.
ServiceNow.
Okay.
Yep. 100%.
All right. All right. So let's get into patch management, because now you've got ServiceNow is the hub in your world, John, with vuln management data coming in from Qualys. Are you using Qualys's patch management to do the patching, or are you using something else?
No. Yeah. I think as frictionless as it could be. I mean, use what the operating system wants to integrate with, right? We're majority Microsoft, right? So we use SCCM, and it gets the job done pretty efficiently.
What are you doing for Mac and Linux and other devices? Do you have a lot of those?
We've got, I don't know, minority Linux, but it's in the environment, and that's just, what are they, Yum servers?
Yeah, Yum servers, yep.
And then on the Macs, the Intune agent can be dropped on that now, and that gives me some visibility on that. But that's a very small marketing population. Of course, zero trust. I mean, who even cares
ZTNA, bro. Do you even ZTNA, bro?
Because when I think patch manager, I'm thinking
I'm also thinking infrastructure.
SCCM.
I'm thinking infrastructure as well, though, right? So,
But what about VMware? Like, what about your virtualization? Like, I feel like, again, Trimark is looking at virtual infrastructure as one of our services, because no one is doing that. We identified very early. We do Active Directory stuff. We do Azure AD. We looked at that and we've seen like everything relies on the fact that your VMware and your virtual infrastructure is secure. If that is not secure, all other things don't matter. Just like at the firmware level, like if your hardware, like Eclipsium and Paul, if your firmware is not securable, then you have no way to identify whether or not your attestation for booting, if anything is changed, if there's a boot kit and
that's
you can't
the really
see it.
too hard.
So let's don't even bring that one in, because that's a whole deep dark hole. But like virtualization is what everything runs on. Like even look at your cloud infrastructure, the ability to attest that your cloud is doing minimal viable security. Like, how do you do that?
Yeah, I was speaking for operating system patches, right? As you detract from that, it gets harder, right? That we just talked about.
But would VMware classify as an operating system for you guys?
No, right? So what happens is ServiceNow, we have types of vulnerabilities, and it's pre-configured to send to the right teams, right? So if a Java vuln drops, it goes to this team. SCCM may or may not take care of it. Maybe it's more of a harder manual effort, but it gets done eventually. But I will say, like, if you look at the feed from US CERT, right? Those top exploited vulnerabilities are not what you're talking about.
VMware Horizon, that's where most of Black Matter runs. VMware, what's the other one?
But the way they're dropping that, the initial access is a MS.
It's usually an MS,
right? Yeah,
right.
Or you end up with something at the VDI.
Is SCCM both in an E3 and an E5 license now for Microsoft? Or isn't it? Does anybody know?
I think Azure AD, you can always integrate SCCM as an Azure AD populated event. And now, however, the Sentinel events that feed from Microsoft Identity for O365, O365 Defender, and then your ability to turn on and off like attack surface reduction rules for Microsoft starts to increase at your E3 and E5 level. So your level of visibility, level of remediation, detection, and then subsequent reaction all is based on your licensing level.
And as you've spoken about that, Microsoft changed the name of 2 of the
Yeah, I was trying to remember what the new name was. Like I was
totally.
just doing that.
I was just gonna say Defender for Endpoint and Defender for Cloud. You could have
Right.
both of those, right?
O365 Defender for identity and endpoint. Yes.
Yes. Interesting, because I think when I think patch management, I think SCCM, I think Automox, I think some of those traditional. And I thought
The Big Fix, is that still out there?
Big Fix is definitely out there in a lot of big
IBM, yeah, IBM
organizations.
still owns that, right? That's
Yeah.
under the IBM umbrella. I like what Qualys has done. You know, I don't know if you remember the conversations, John, in the early days about kind of crossing that line from a
Tried to
Qualys
forget
perspective.
all of them.
Yeah, I know. But I remember like this conversation with Philippe back in the day, like he didn't want to cross that line. And I thought it was very interesting to see Qualys being kind of the first VM vendor to actually cross over into patch management. That's why I asked if you were using their patching solution or not, because it's an interesting capability that's built into the Qualys
Oh yeah,
suite.
if you're an SMB and you can't afford the staffing that takes to run ServiceNow properly or anything,
Oh my God,
it's
No,
wonderful,
yeah,
right?
Yeah, right.
It's filling a hole that's needed to be filled, certainly.
Yeah.
I think
Okay.
that falls into the next category, though. Like, in order to do this right, and you rely on something like Qualys, right? You have to have your identity and access management really tuned down and locked down. Otherwise, like now you've opened yourself to a new attack surface rather than prevented and mitigated an attack threat.
Now, this one will probably be one of the 2 longest discussions, which
Oh,
is
boy.
identity and access management. So I said, John, we were going to defer this to this segment. What I find interesting going on in the identity and access management space is what Thoma Bravo's been doing recently. They bought Forge Rock,
They bought everything.
SailPoint, Ping. Could we see some interesting consolidation in the identity and access management space to pull in MFA, SSO, PIM-PAM, and get away from needing like 5 products in the identity and access management space?
I'd love to, but I think people need to they need to continue to pay attention to Microsoft.
That's
I was just- we were just saying that.
I have Microsoft's page up in front of me
Yeah.
with all the suite.
Yeah.
E5 is going to destroy.
I think so.
All
With the
of
Azure?
Well, I think it can. I think what I'd love to see, and I don't know how far Microsoft has taken some of this in their E5 licensing, right? Obviously, if you're a Microsoft shop and you're using AD, like what are the other things that Microsoft has to bring to the market, and what have they brought to the
They're already
market
bringing it. I mean,
to kind of fill that whole identity and access management gap?
We talked about, I mean, just to go back to the infrastructure management side, I brought up Azure Arc and I showed it to Tyler. They have Purview to go look at all your data governance and privacy, right? So they're bringing all of these products to the table. Do not sleep on Microsoft.
Yeah, I
I'm
will
telling you
say,
right now.
like I describe Microsoft as like the CISSP of security products, where they do everything just a little bit about that deep.
Right.
You know, but so we're E5 entitled.
Yep.
I'm not using all the products,
Sure.
but I will tell you every 2 years I reevaluate.
Yep.
Because I know I'm spending money that may or may not need to.
Yeah, it's about $26 a user, I think, something like
Yeah.
that for
yeah.
an
Again,
E5,
I don't
right?
I don't have to pay for that, which is
It's about
budget
it's
I
about
love,
50,
right?
it's about 50 unless you're like super scale.
Yeah.
Oh,
but
got it.
we're reevaluating email security, right? We have to do it, right?
You have
Because eventually I think
That,
it's going to get
that being
there.
said, like Microsoft is nothing to snuff at. You look at where Defender has come in O365 and the telemetry that is being gathered from Windows 10 and Windows 11. There's no one in the market space that has the capability, because Microsoft doesn't share that telemetry, and their threat profile across all of their devices and their ability to respond and push out updates without your consent and approval to some, dismay.
Trillions and trillions of people.
Trillions of endpoints and telemetry and bits of data from an attacker standpoint. There's probably not a vendor that is harder to get around right now than Defender with an E5 license that's tuned.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Nothing
That's
even
one of the
close.
areas we did make the switch. We brought in a red team, had the incumbent endpoint, Defender, and then, a new flashy one. And, Defender was good enough.
They see analytics.
Listen, nobody's
they
going
see
to detect past the
heuristics.
hash better than Microsoft.
No.
Right?
Right.
It's just-
Right.
It's there. Right. And it does a good job.
And,
No.
this is the conversation, though, right? The conversation is, do you go out and buy 40 point solutions that are on the Magic Quadrant
Yep.
that you're adopting 20% of for each of them?
Mhm.
Or do you go out and you actually get a suite of tools that you're adopting 80% of the capability? Will put you in a better posture.
80-20 rule all day.
It puts you in a better posture.
And not to mention, they have their compliance already done because of all of the GDPR things that they've had to do, all of the compliance and regulatory verticals they have to cover, you can certify basically instantly with something like an E5 license.
You get many different authority documents.
It's
literally
unreal.
just had a conversation with law enforcement.
It's a download
CJIS,
package.
Boom, out of the package.
Yeah.
You go GovCloud, done.
Well, they're compliant ready, Jake.
Got it, but you have to configure it. But that's the adoption side of it.
Yeah.
But they get you to that point where at least you don't have to worry about the infrastructure, the back end being compliant.
Or integration. That is the other part that like no one thinks about. Like Windows out of the box works, Azure AD with a hybrid cloud where you've got an AD Connect server and you're looking at bad passwords for conditional access and your identities that you don't even have to have ZTNA because you've got this conditional access, you've got an endpoint management, you got Intune.
Acronym.
He does.
I just like to say it because I see everyone's eyebrow. Oh, ZTNA.
Right.
So it means nothing.
So are there any gaps in the Microsoft identity solutions that has to be filled? And who's going to fill them?
So I think their two-factor still has gaps in the enterprise management visibility space, right? If somebody drops Authenticator on their phone, I don't even know what happens, right? If I'm running an enterprise security program, I need to know who's downloaded this version. Are they using it? Are they doing push to accept, right? It's very much a consumer-driven type agent, in my opinion, right now. But again, as I said, like, so I don't use it today doesn't mean I'm not going to use it next year or the year after.
But you can fix that with policy, though.
I was going to say Intune policy with that.
100%.
But not on phones I don't own.
You can.
You can.
My phone.
right
they
Yeah,
don't
I'm saying
know.
I can't enforce people install Intune on their.
Yeah, you can.
I cannot.
As a
I
work
cannot
as a work
force
environment.
my employee to install Intune on a employee-owned asset.
If they register Authenticator or if they install
there's the
Outlook.
can, though, Tyler. He's not allowed to.
Oh,
Yeah, certainly, yeah.
He's not allowed
Yes.
to.
I mean,
When
if you
Authenticator
put
installs
my
as a force
customer on
Intune,
there.
sure,
Yeah,
yes. I can't drop a certificate on something I don't know.
He's not allowed
it
to.
is interesting how they've kind of segmented and forced the consumer market down to a workplace, to a bring your own device. Even my own device, like to have an Outlook profile that has a work email on it requires an Intune policy that manages a work profile on a system that is either sandboxed or allow full control over.
But see, this right
This
now
is a problem.
This
for
is
me.
the risk management conversation you have to have with your executives, though, because you have to sit back and say, I am not allowed to force my employees to put an agent or a certificate on their personal device.
Or do you want the
So now you
liability
sit
of putting
back-
that on their personal
right.
device?
So now you sit back and you say, all right, well, then we have to issue cell phones. We have
Right.
to issue mobile devices.
That's a cost.
Well, it's just that it's the conversation now is if you want email on your mobile device, you have to have Intune on there. If you don't have a necessity to have email on your device, then
All right.
Right.
that's a management decision to make.
Right.
That's right.
If the
That's
manager
right.
says they need to, then if they
But
don't
then
want to
they're
do
not-
it, then we buy a cell
They're
phone.
not interfacing with your organization on their personal devices, then.
Correct.
Yeah.
Or you have different profiles. Like that is a thing that Android has now brought. Like
Yeah, I don't think
iPhone is another.
iPhone doesn't do it.
Nope.
Yeah.
iPhone is an entirely different conversation because their ecosystem does not play well with Microsoft, and their ability to sandbox correctly is not up to the corporate speed. As much as people like, I was iPhone 4 months ago because it was more secure. And then 0 days dropped, and like they pissed me off because their ecosystem and their updates enforced crap. So you move over to Android, like the ecosystem and the diversity of what your endpoint users want to use versus what you need from an organization and a business standpoint. That's an entirely different conversation. That's culture and adoption and your ability to then have a standard. Like I don't think you can do one or the other and force that from an IT standpoint because you're going to always have users like me that have multiple email accounts and won't do a sandbox and won't run an iPhone.
Yeah.
I'm trying to get to passwordless as fast as possible.
Now that's a whole nother conversation. FIDO2 and passwords.
hello has to be part of the conversation, right?
Oh,
It
yeah,
does.
totally.
So we're beginning to look at that next year. We've looked at some of the cool vendors out there. Hyper is one of them, right? They're a lot on the B2C, but they do a lot of employee type stuff. So we're looking into the whole gamut. But
with
that's where
Apple
people
and
would be
Microsoft,
happy,
right?
right? If I stop asking them to be like, all right, get out your. Some people still have the keychains, which blows
I'm
my
telling you,
mind. but
Microsoft does a good job. We're going down that path as well.
Oh, yeah.
But
Microsoft
Apple
does
and
a great
Microsoft
job.
adopted that.
If
FIDO,
Microsoft's MFA is a little lacking, do I need another
is it, though?
MFA? I don't know. That's what I heard from John.
I think so from MFA it works. Me managing it and day to day of like, did they fail a passcode entry? Is there a brute force happening? I can't see it.
Conditional, like it takes some of the more advanced features, and that is a lot of tuning. I'm going to tell you right now, like to get to the
access,
point.
just change the user and agent string, and you're good.
So
you know that.
we did away with the approve or deny though. We actually push a pin, and now you have to enter the pin into the approval.
And the device has to be registered.
And it has to be registered, right? So it's taking away that, because
that's policy and procedure.
Even my offensive guys, you know what they would do? They'd swamp you with MFA requests and just annoy you till you hit approve.
If you have hundreds of people offshore that have clean room policies and can't bring cell phones into call centers,
it's a bad
you gotta
day.
you gotta really understand the whole ecosystem.
Yep.
No, those are important enterprise nuances that I don't think a lot of people actually understand. Like, talk about offshore, talk about outsourcing, talk about help desk, talk about government, right? Like any of the NOC, SOC, end up in a SCIF. Like there's some important pieces there that from an enterprise, like you, even from a procurement and the ability to interface as a vendor for many of these government organizations, there's quite a few hoops to jump through that people don't often scale or think about from a solution standpoint.
All right. So now we're going to go to EDR, MDR, XDR.
Oh boy.
Defender, anybody? I mean,
I love it.
I love it too.
No, so I'm curious, John, right? I can imagine if you're E5 and you've got access to Defender for Windows, for cloud, for etc., is that not the no-brainer here?
So if you're going to then strap on Sentinel, right, to really get that, like what you talked about, that kind of SIM and endpoint kind of viewpoint, it begins to get expensive because storage is expensive in Azure.
It is.
Yes. But Splunk is also expensive.
But Splunk's expensive.
Splunk is also, I don't use either one of them. So
Right.
But I've got Defender, and then I also have an XDR agent on there with a managed
So you're doing an
SIM
overlay.
on that.
You're doing an overlay.
And a lot of that is because I need 24/7 support, right?
So your SOC
operations team
NOC
is not.
becomes important.
Yes, and
What
they're
they
managing
use.
the XDR, which gets the endpoint logs in there too, right? I think that as Sentinel is in the market longer, you're going to get more vendors that will manage those logs 24/7. Blue Voyant's one of them, right?
Absolutely,
I think
100%.
And when there's more of those, again, it's something. I'm doing a renewal right now on my 24/7 managed XDR. And I did a 1 year.
Yeah, I mean, there's tons of them out there. There's Secure Sky, who used to be Solutionary. The founders of Solutionary brought up Secure Sky, and it's 100% Sentinel based, Microsoft Sentinel based, and they're killing it. They're on that same trajectory like a Blue Voyant, right? The question now becomes, how are our philosophies adapting to where we're at, right? Because now there's a struggle between your traditional SIMSOC, which is eyes on glass, 24/7. Or that XDR model where it's like we have people who are ready and waiting, and when there's an alert, we'll jump.
That really depends on your MSSP though, right? Like you are kind of at the will of the MSSP. Look at like something like Expel or Blue Voyant. Like they're very specific on what they would like on the endpoint and what they will respond to and be able to remediate based on what you provide them. So at the end of the day, you're reliant on who you choose for your MSSP, not necessarily your XDR.
Yeah, there's a interesting startup in the Dallas area, ContraForce, that it's 100% in on Microsoft, right? So I'm an advisor, all disclosure, and and the reason I'm an advisor is because I see this Microsoft trend, right? I see it, the ability to take an E5 license, integrate all the data into Sentinel, and use Sentinel as a way to manage your detection and response capabilities. I think is really interesting at the SMB and SME level.
Not just Microsoft data.
Yes.
Cloud for Defender will do GCP, will do AWS. You have Azure Arc that will tie into all of your infrastructure and bring all that telemetry.
But then you do have to evaluate
for all of your data.
But you got a business continuity.
I was going to say you have a business continuity problem and you have a price issue. Those two things with Sentinel, like the price issue, like Splunk aside, Splunk is super expensive, but Sentinel on itself is also very expensive. So you have to evaluate, are you able to carry the amount of logs that are required for your regulatory and or business risk appetite? And can you afford that for someone to look at all the time? And is that good data?
Cloud financial operations
Cloud financial operation.
It's a newer term.
It's a thing.
Is that ZTNA the next?
No, well, it's not a security thing, but yeah.
It's forecasting your Azure spend.
Yeah,
it's
when you're
forecasting
all
your
in
cloud
on
spend.
GCP or AWS, you got to have a team that's looking at this.
I wish I
we
would've
turned
had
on
that.
some advanced logging in Defender, and we were very excited. And the FinOps team
And then you
called
get
me
your bill.
immediately.
And then you get your bill.
And then well, I didn't get the bill. They got the bill the first month, but it didn't happen the second month. Let's put it that way. So right.
Yep.
Right. So if it's not Defender, who else plays in this market? Because if I think about what CrowdStrike has done,
Sentinel-1.
Sentinel-1.
Yeah, Sentinel-1 and CrowdStrike, right, are probably the next two logical EDR, MDR, XDR vendors, right? I know CrowdStrike has done some really interesting stuff in their acquisition portfolio. You've got your base EDR. They've done some stuff around vuln management, some patch management kind of capabilities. They brought some data security stuff with the Secure Circle acquisition. They've done some identity stuff with, I think it was Preempt that they bought. Does CrowdStrike still have a play in this market? I think they do. They're still kind of the top dog in EDR, right?
They do a good job.
I think so, yeah. Yeah, you got Rapid7 in the space too.
Right.
Yeah, listen, there's no losers in this conversation, right? If you've got an environment where you've got a managed XDR, you're doing, well, hopefully you've got the foundations that we talked about. Right. But you're making your job very difficult, right?
It becomes much more difficult. You talk about EDR and you look at any of them, they've all stepped up their game. Like you look at the research and what they put out, like Carbon Black, Sentinel-1, Elastic. Like let's don't discount Elastic. Like Endgame was a great acquisition. I haven't seen it leveraged in the way that I was expecting.
Yeah, right.
But they're fantastic.
I'm just worried that some of those vendors under an E5 licensing structure potentially struggle in a consolidated environment.
That's what's going to happen. When the budgets are getting pinched, that's what's going to get looked at. That's what's going to be under the microscope. Yeah. Under the microscope, right? Mm-hmm. So we're going to have to be able to make the case of having that extra overlay. We have, because Sentinel, I know Sentinel-1. Yep. You can set Defender as the primary, and then Sentinel-1 as that secondary scan, and you're okay. But you have that layer of protection, that additional layer of protection.
But then why? Because you have to pay for an E5 already.
I know.
You need an Azure AD. You need an email account.
That's the pressure I think a lot of CISOs are under. In a day when our
budgets are nice and healthy, that's great.
Well, that's why, you do a bake-off, you quantify the risk, you look at the gaps, and if the risk is quantified greater than the feature set, then you go with the other tool still.
That's it.
Right. All right.
The other tool or in combination with.
Yep.
I think we're at that point where in combination with, though, has become a luxury for those places that are doing or have a little extra spend.
100%. That's it.
Agreed. All right. Now we got to go to backup recovery.
Oh, boy.
Is the next piece. Where do we start?
Yeah. You said something earlier of like the recovery journey of post ransomware or something like that. And really like which backup is okay. What was infected, right? One thing to be like, oh, I got infected. We'll just, roll back to yesterday's tape. Or not tape.
Look at you.
Yeah,
I said tape coming in.
Look at
I'm not even 40 yet, Jay. Right? But what if that's infected, right? So there's some new tools out there that are just saying like, which will give you this is your clean copy. Hopefully it's within your, recovery point objectives and you get it done,
ransomware
right?
secure.
No, I mean, who are you using for backup recovery?
Rubrik.
Interesting.
Yep. Yeah, Microsoft just didn't have enough, right? We still use them for snapshots, right? If we have VMs in the cloud, you take that.
So are we back to that hybrid? Like I know we've done this for 30 years, right? We've been at the mainframe. We went to bare metal. We went to the desktop. We went back to VDI. We've come all the way back around
AVD
to virtual.
in Azure is just a big mainframe.
Oh my! It is. It is an AS400. Like I don't care what anybody says.
We have to define backup and recovery though, because for me it's like I want all my firewall configs.
So configuration backup is an entirely different thing.
That's it though.
You
no
one
to be able to
most
manage
important.
that. Though.
Everybody's like, I backed up my C drive, right?
Yeah.
You're not just backing up your data or your servers, or you're backing up the configurations of your infrastructure.
Right. So do we bring Cisco
firewalls
into the mix yet?
Cisco and Fortinet and all of your infrastructure players.
Palo Alto.
Yeah, you have to be able to back up all your configs. That's part of this.
But I think the other problem on backup, like the huge issue I've always seen with backup, and having done a lot of incident response or breach recovery coaching, the time to recovery and cost dollar amount to that time to recovery plays into it that people don't actually put into the calculations when they're picking a solution. You may have a terabyte that got encrypted and that's critical data. Like, take something like the federal government where you're looking at DOJ and cases, active cases where people get let off of the hook. If you can't have a case that can't get postponed again, that's a big problem. You have to have a recovery time that is equal to the case time. And that recovery time, you can't get a terabyte back down a pipe that is not capable of taking
But Tyler,
that
how
pipe.
do you solve for that? Business impact analysis.
Yeah,
you
but-
actually you go through exercises.
You mean tabletop?
But I think
anything.
Well, no, a
tabletops
BIA is very different than a tabletop. I think the problem is, as security experts, we don't go into the BIA conversation often enough.
Right.
Already having quantified an RTO and RPO.
Yep.
Right. You go in there and say, "Hey, when do you want this?" Every single business leader
It's going to tell me
say,
immediately.
Now.
Immediately. And we don't answer with it's $7 million fast enough.
Right.
Yeah.
So we need to do that homework first time, and then you'll get that RTO RPO.
That's
All
where
right,
that comes into
72
play.
plus.
Right.
Right. We just did an exercise, and there were some business processes that were more critical in their eyes than some actual critical things. So we're just, but I'll eat my own dog food. We haven't quantified what it's going to take to get them where they think they should be.
Right.
But it's an important part of the
But
conversation.
you need to
It
do that
is.
analysis. You need to do the BIAs.
Now that'll come up in the risk management conversation, which is next. I just want to finish out this piece because there's a few other vendors out there that talk about this. I mean, I could see backup recovery being a potential multi-solution environment just because
have to be.
100%.
I can't get all of it right.
Yep. VMware Snapshot. You bring in VMware to this, and you look at your
VMs,
your VMs, your vSphere
Yeah.
integrations, and then your ability to do on-site, off-site, and hybrid recovery.
Commvault for endpoint,
Commvault,
right? There's a lot of stuff.
100%.
Oh my God, I remember the Commvault
VxRails,
discussions. Like,
Right.
you're taking me
Immutable
back
storage now. Now
a
you're going to
long
immutable
way.
storage.
It's just after tape. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Oh my God, I remember walking into Progressive, having a Commvault conversation on backup recovery. This is like early 2000s, guys.
I'm talking
this-
2002 Symantec tape library. We're talking about tape libraries.
Oh yeah. Oh my gosh.
Tape fires.
All right. Last topic we got to cover: risk management. So, I'm curious. If Snow is my asset management solution, am I leveraging ServiceNow to do my risk management stuff? Is it robust enough, or do I have to look at another risk management provider? I'm just curious.
I think that they're a Microsoft conversation. I think in a couple years they'll be there.
Yes.
Because they started with, they've always been like an incident management, as in something's not working in IT. That boils up to a problem when you have a bunch of incidents, right? Now they've got cyber incident management, right? Where they're dabbling in the GRC space. I don't know if they're ready for enterprise risk management.
So here's what I'll say. So they have SecOps for the technical side. They have GRC for the governance risk compliance side. Governance, super strong. Risk management, not there yet.
Who's that? ServiceNow?
Snow.
Yeah.
Governance is strong.
Yeah.
I took 18 authority documents and aligned all of them to NIST 853 high impact.
Wow.
In GRC, in ServiceNow GRC. Now, let's move that to a risk management conversation. Not as strong.
Yeah.
But governance, super, super strong.
And I think part of that comes from some of the Archer kind of leaders that went over there originally, right? They built out some good governance components into ServiceNow. ServiceNow was a sponsor on this program a couple of years ago, and I did get a chance to do a deep dive. I guess the question becomes, are they robust enough to manage the over enterprise risk management environment? I'm curious who you're using for enterprise.
GRC, we're all in on Archer.
Are you? Okay.
Yeah. It's heavy on the management side, right? We have the right team that's managing this. If it's not, then, I think the reason I was hired 5 years ago at Blue Cross, because my hiring manager at the time said, "What do you think about Archer?" I said, "It's as good as you've configured it. Other than that, it's garbage," right?
Been there,
and
done
she
that.
was like, "You're
So
hired," right?
everything.
So,
Right.
Yeah. But I think ServiceNow could be that way. Anything could be that way. But it does take a nuanced care and feeding.
You have to put the elbow grease in. It's
you
the
do.
do hard.
Do hard. There
Yeah,
it
it's
is.
a do hard.
Full
And I
circle.
think, I mean, truly, look, I spent 2.5 years at Archer after having built, a competitor
I gotta
to
stop
it in the
using tools
industry.
where you worked, I think.
Yeah, probably. But, having gone there for 2.5 years, I knew what gave Archer the advantage. It was the flexibility of the model. The concern and the challenge with Archer was its scale, right? And as you think about tying in EDR data, tying in patch management data, tying in identity and access management data, Can you do that in Archer in a real-time basis to give you a good risk profile in a near real-time? It doesn't have to be real-time, but it has to be more than an assessment questionnaire that's been launched across all these environments. And I think the challenge that I see with the traditional GRCs, and in Archer came up, look, Archer defined the space. Derbyshire defined the space in the early days. Are they robust enough to handle the data ingest required to really give you near real-time risk analysis, or are there other vendors out there that do a better job?
Yeah, we're not real time whatsoever inside of Archer, right? But nor is our enterprise risk management, right? I'm not calling up a divisional vice president like, you just turned red a second ago, right? Like, you know, there's some metrics that we're reporting that are based on surveys to our Medicare population, right? Again, this is not just a cyber conversation in ERM.
This is business risk management.
Does this need to be real time?
I think.
I mean, ideally, yes.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, I think
Nirvana, right? We got to talk.
I think you're blending like a managed XDR with enterprise risk management, where it doesn't. You know, it's like the level is 1,000 feet and 1 foot. I don't know if they're the same conversation.
Yeah.
Not able to quantify those two.
Yeah.
No, it's an interesting conversation.
Something I will
because
think about probably for the next week, though. So thank you.
yeah. No, I just, I look at what most of the GRCs are doing, right? Because I still track the industry. In the question is, it's all about the frequency of updating the data tied back to the risk register. Now, the risk register doesn't change that often, typically, right? You know what risks you're managing against.
Should that change more, though?
It might, but even without that for a second, Tyler, right? If my risk register is not changing, but the data that's feeding the risk register isn't frequent enough, am I getting enough real-time risk metrics to actually make decisions off of? And that's where I've seen the Archers and some of the traditional early GRCs not being near real-time enough.
Yeah, but so like our ERM program is not tuning a signature. It's not dropping an agent where it doesn't exist. It's more of changing a cultural conversation, because I'm seeing a trend, right? My CEO a couple years ago said, John, I need ERM metrics that help me look around the corner, that I know that 6 months from now, that's going to go red, right? So if I start to see big cyber trends turning a corner, it's very different than...
It's lead measures versus lag measures.
Yeah.
You're trying to look ahead.
Yeah, absolutely.
And this is the lead measures conversation.
Yeah.
So is that a good vendor that is feeding into good
Archer
threat
doesn't
intel?
help me get lead. No, Archer collects them and reports on them.
Right.
So that's post. You're looking at prior. You're looking at the past, and you're not looking at what's moving
Every
forward.
year, I'll sit down. It just happened last week. Sit down with the team. Right. What are the current threats?
What's the team?
Anything,
What's the team? Talk about who the team is.
At the table, it was just last week, right? At the table was security operations, information assurance, privacy, and enterprise risk management.
Okay.
And we all sat together like, what are we dealing with? What are our threats? What are our regulatory obligations? And what is our strategy?
Who's feeding those threats into that team?
So our threat intelligence team.
Okay.
And we're...
Is that coming from an external source? So does threat intelligence play into the overall risk management of an organization?
Absolutely.
I don't know how many are tied that tightly,
so
but
good
should.
threat intel becomes a critical asset.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. So here's where we ended up. I've been taking notes throughout this whole thing because I want to summarize this and get us to closure. On the asset management side, we talked about ServiceNow and Qualys is a couple solutions that really help us at the asset management. Microsoft, very strong with SCCM, at least on the Microsoft portfolio. You've got Yum on Linux. There's some other technologies out there on Mac.
Jamf, right? Jamf
out there. I still like Automox because they do them all in one single cloud solution. But I'm an advisor, so heads up.
No, don't sleep on Automox.
Yeah, Automox has some
I agree.
They have
I'll probably
some good
end up buying
capabilities.
them in a year from now if he's...
I was going to say, like, they're getting acquired 100%.
Of course. Identity and access management, very interesting. A lot on Microsoft with some Hello and some other MFA capabilities in the mix. That's interesting. You're going to see a theme here, folks. EDR, Microsoft, CrowdStrike, SentinelOne. If you can afford anything beyond your E5 contracts, that's the very interesting thing to think about.
But you can also pair those together. That was one of the things I didn't mention is you can have an E5 license with a bunch of F1 or F2 licenses.
Sure.
Those frontline
You
workers.
can.
If you have people that are just doing email, they don't have an endpoint, you can provide them just with an email. And then you can pair that with an E5 for your admins and for the people that matter.
That's a great point. You do not have to go 100% across the board with an E5. You don't have to do that.
Oh, that's very interesting. Backup recovery rubric. Obviously, Cisco, Palo Alto, and Checkpoint for your infrastructure side.
Veeam.
Risk
Fortinet.
management. ServiceNow comes back into the mix from a governance perspective. You got Archer sitting in there. It's a very interesting list. Like when I think about the top 6,
Microsoft Excel for risk management.
you mean Power BI? No, Power BI, baby. It's not Excel anymore.
Microsoft Access.
Right.
Which is Excel with some macros.
That's
Excel with macros.
Banned speech. Banned speech.
Yes.
All right.
Can't say access.
So by the way, one of the first platforms I used to do some of this mapping was Access way back in the day.
yeah,
So,
you.
oh my gosh.
Look at
No.
you.
Yeah, it was crazy. But, Power BI is just a Excel on steroids.
Well,
so I guess you could do
with
it.
flow,
With-
right?
Yeah, with
That's
Flow.
not Flow anymore.
But I mean, it's very
Power
interesting.
Apps. It's Power Apps.
You could pull off the minimum viable security with ServiceNow, Microsoft, and a really good set of backup recovery solutions. Like that's my takeaway from this segment.
Who
Like-
needs 60-point solutions?
Exactly. I'm just saying, like, Paul and I sit on a lot of advisory calls, and we do a lot of this because we've been in the industry for so long, and I've heard these statements over and over. I can use Microsoft and Zscaler to get the majority of my requirements nailed. Like,
ZTNA.
right? Yeah, that back to the ZTNA. They call it ZPA or ZIA or whatever, but
Z something.
yeah, Z something. But I mean, look, Microsoft's a major player in this space that I think is the company that's been like behind the scenes that is going to make some major disruptions potentially across some of these environments.
They've been playing
what was the saying?
chess.
What was the saying? This isn't your grandfather's Microsoft.
Yes. They've been playing chess. Everybody else has been playing checkers. They've been acquiring, they've been setting up, they've been rebranding,
100%.
and their rebranding is not just to make your job difficult and change the names.
If you talk to the 30-year-old Jason,
Oh,
I'd be
man.
like, blasphemy, blasphemy.
You guys all
blasphemy.
suck.
No way.
Right.
Yeah.
Different time, different age.
I know, and they've made some very
Oh my God.
yeah. And when you think about cloud, you think about what they're doing with Defender in the cloud and supporting not only Azure but
Amazing.
GCP and AWS. They're a major player in this conversation.
Multi-tenant, multi-manufacturer.
As soon as they acquire a ZTNA company, it's game over.
Oh my God.